Looking at the more than 20 years worth of mystery cases within the Detective Conan anime, the differences and deductions between Conan and Hattori have appeared in many special cases. Some of them are a result of Hattori not getting enough physical evidence, and others are a result of Conan's sensibility as a person overwhelming his rationale as a detective. But this is actually the first case in which both people deduced wrongly, even after obtaining the same information. From the viewer's point of view, thinking that Conan's deduction must be correct is obvious. After all, we did see a shadowy figure in the maintenance room aiming a gun at Kameda's head. So what exactly did Hattori find at the bow of the boat to think that both their deductions were wrong? Just who is the deceased, and who is the real murderer? We come back to the moment when Hattori was pushed off the boat by a dark shadow. Conan, with his absolute pitch ability, sensed the unique sound of something falling in the water at that very moment, and his sixth sense sounded an alarm in him. Afterward, he searched for Hattori's whereabouts everywhere on the ship, but Hattori was nowhere to be found, which further verified his previous hunch. Rushing to the guardrails outside of the boat, he shouted the name of his friend into the pitch-black sea, and the only response was the sound of the waves. Suddenly, another shadowy figure with glasses appeared behind Conan and quietly moved his hand close to him. Ebina felt Conan's position was too dangerous and was scared he would fall, so he carried him back, as several other passengers gathered on the deck at the same time. Ebina and Kujirai were entrusted by Isogai to find her lost pendant, which just so happened to be found by Ran. Inside is a photo of an adult man holding a baby. Isogai hesitated, saying that the baby in the photo was herself, the man was her father, and this pendant was a relic left by her father to her. Ebina, on the other hand, saw the tenderness with which Ran treated Conan, reminding him of another woman, a woman exactly like the daughter Inspector Samazaki had remembered. When the crowd got back to the restaurant, they started arguing about whether to continue staying together as it was now, or whether it would be safer to lock the doors to their own rooms and be alone. Now that Hattori had disappeared, Conan re-examined the case this time. Previously, he had always thought that the deceased and the culprits were two of the three missing people, but in view of the suspicious words, as well as deeds of the other passengers, he planned to expand the scope of the suspects to include all of the passengers. The first one to suspect was Inspector Samazaki, who had been abnormal since he heard the name Kano Saizo. Even though it was a case he hadn't solved since 20 years ago, he was now a bit too intense. Conan speculates that there must have been some backstory to that robbery 20 years ago, so he went to the bathroom to contact Professor Agasa for more information. According to Agasa, the police had known Kano Saizo's appearance 20 years ago, and his blood-stained coat was found on the beach not long after the incident to confirm his death. It was confirmed that it was Kano Saizo's coat, because a photo was found in a coat pocket of him holding a small baby, while the last name of the bank clerk who was accidentally killed was a woman with the same last name as Inspector Samazaki, named Samazaki Yoshimi. For some strange reason, all the people connected to that event were coincidentally gathered on the ship. Suddenly, 4 gunshots from the rear of the boat interrupted Conan's thinking. Everyone came to the source of the sound, but no one was seen. It seemed that the culprits may have hid again through a passageway on the deck. This kind of trick, in which everyone is treated like puppets, is similar to the organizer of the shadows, Kano Saizo. Kujirai completely panics, and he thinks the killer's next target is him. He said he was willing to confess everything to seek protection. Everyone went back to the safe haven of the restaurant to listen to the testimony of Kujirai. He, Kani, and Kameda were deduced by Conan to be the same 3 perpetrators, with the purpose of this trip being to enjoy the salvation after 20 years of having escaped. When confronted about who wanted to kill him, he said he didn't know. Kano Saizo was indeed dead 20 years ago. If one of his companions wanted to kill him, he couldn't figure out their motive. At this time, another gunshot rang out. Kujirai fell to the ground with blood flowing from the bullet hole in his arm, and everyone else also fell to the ground. Another gunshot came, and Conan moved to the window to try and find the shooter. Unfortunately, it was dark outside, and only a shadow could be seen in the bow of the boat, so he couldn't figure out their identity. As a former police officer, Samazaki dangerously ventured towards the shadowy figure's location alone, only to find out that the shadowy figure Kani was dead. There were burn marks on his head from where the gun's muzzle shot against. The body remained warm, and the bloodstains weren't dry. All the evidence points out that he had just died, and the probability of suicide was very high. Inspector Samazaki made a similar deduction as Conan had done before. Kani killed Kameda, or the old man, disguised them as himself, burned them to death, and he had been lurking on the ship through the rope ladder at the bow to kill his other partner, but failed. In the end, his only option was suicide. But there was still a question in their minds. Why did the culprit take such complicated steps? Back at the restaurant, Kujirai's arms were tied to restrain the arteries and prevent excessive bleeding. The bullet holes and shell casings that broke the glass of the restaurant were found in turn from the angle of the culprit's shooting. The ability to hit the target with precision from such a distance impressed Mori with such marksmanship. It was found out that Kani was one of the 3 accomplices who had participated in an infantry within a foreign country. While Mori and the others were doing emergency treatment on Kujirai, Conan was still worried about the missing Hatsuri, so he continued his search, while Ran was looking for Conan in classic fashion. Abina's behavior was suspicious in the testimony given by the ship's crew. His room was too clean, and the heavy suitcase he had was not even open yet. The increasing number of puzzles gave Conan a headache, and after investigating in Abina's room, he revisited the place where the gun had been fired before. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew the paper he was holding onto the railing in the shape of a cross. At this moment, the young detective finally realized the reason why all the people involved in the incident 20 years ago were gathered together on this boat. There were also some recent burn marks as well as peeling paint marks on the railing, and the same was found in several other corners. All the puzzles were connected except for the last piece, which was currently flying towards Conan's head. Ron came up to him angrily. What kind of 6-year-old elementary school kid would run around in the early hours of the morning on a boat where a murder had just happened? Just when I thought Conan was about to be criticized again. The sky's numerous stars and the sea's gentle breeze. Just the impact of that sentence alone has surpassed the police detective love story series that took more than 10 episodes to describe. Anyway, a tennis ball found in a restaurant, an old gunshot wound found at Kani, and a mysterious phone call with Professor Agasa said it all. A tranquilized Mori, all the actors gather, and the final mystery show begins. The process is basically the same as the previous deductions. Kani killed Kameda and put his body in the box. After a while, at 12 o'clock, Inspector Samazaki stopped searching, and that's when he put his clothes, watch, etc. onto the body. In order to prevent the phenomenon of rigor mortis from occurring after too long, he also straightened his arms, which would be more convenient for changing clothing. Then, he called Kujirai out and wanted to blame him for the murder. Eventually, as we saw, the assassination failed, and he then committed suicide. The only thing that was different from the previous deduction was that the motive for the murder was not for money, but for revenge. Revenge for the companions who had betrayed him, as the old wound on the shoulder was caused by his companions 20 years ago. His real identity was Kano Saizo himself, who had seemingly died 20 years ago. All the seemingly excessive tricks are what he wanted to give to those couple of traitors in order to inflict mental fear on them. This was the truth created by the real culprit. It was Hatsuri who first noticed the difference. When he saw the charred corpse, he found that the watch was worn on the wrong hand. The adjustment button of this gold watch was set on the left, indicating that it was specifically worn on the right hand. The watch on the corpse is on the left hand. If Kani really wanted to disguise the corpse as himself, then it would have been impossible to have made such a mistake. That's also why Hatsuri thought Kani couldn't be a culprit in the first place. Conan discovered the trap when Hatsuri asked Conan to put the watch back on the corpse. Intentionally loosening the strap, plus it being on the wrong hand, all proved the fact that the real murderer was someone else. That murderer had faked an old man named Kano Saizo, the bill with strange words written on it, and finally showed everyone the gunshot wound on Kani's body to create a sense of revenge from the dead. The only person who could have possibly done such a thing was someone who knew Kani had a gunshot wound, his former accomplice, the one still alive in the gang, Kujirai Sadao. His crime props were very simple, automatic ignition devices made from cigarettes. First, preparing a burning cigarette, as well as gasoline, putting the cigarette in the gap of a box and suspending it with a thread, then placing a gasoline-filled can under it. In less than 10 minutes, the fire on the cigarette will hit the thread, burn it, and drop it into the gasoline to ignite it. In addition to this, they had to prepare some firecrackers to fake the sound of gunfire, stick cigarettes and firecrackers together on the railing with tape. Then, after a few minutes, the firecrackers would meet with fire and explode. All the evidence would fall into the sea with only slight burn marks and peeling paint marks on the railings. The way to set a flag on the fire is similar, soaking the flag with gasoline and lighting it with cigarettes as well as firecrackers to fake the gunshots, while Kujirai himself had been staying with the others to create an alibi this whole time. The complete sequence is as follows. First, leading and killing Kameda in the maintenance room where there were no people around, transferring the body to the box at the rear of the boat, then tying it up with ropes to prevent it from being found by the few people who were looking around. The second step was to go to the recreational room to play poker with everyone, leave the room with Kani on the pretext of going to the bathroom, use some drug to make him fall asleep, then take away his clothing and watch, putting it on Kameda, loosening the strap on purpose, then setting the same traps I mentioned on the flag and the box. He then pretended to yell a few times and was witnessed by others, giving the impression that he was called over by someone else. Not to mention, the crew who had witnessed that the box hadn't caught fire at this time, plus the paper that was purposely thrown in the bathroom's garbage. All in all, proved that he was the hypothetical victim. Finally, going back to the recreational room to show the others his Oscar-worthy acting skills. There was an explosion at the rear that when everyone went towards it, he came to the bow and tied the unconscious Kani to the rope ladder. There was no reason to kill him on the spot in order to fabricate a sense of reality. It would seem unnatural for culprits who had made so many preparations to kill him to commit suicide so quickly. At the very least, Kani has to be set up with a feeling that he had nowhere left to go. Kani in the bow was later accidentally discovered by Hatori, and Kujirai could only try to push him into the sea, trying to hide the truth. When helping Isekai find the pendant, he took the opportunity to set up 4 firecrackers at the rear of the boat. When the others heard the sound of the firecrackers and ran out, he came to the bow alone to kill Kani, then set up the 2 firecrackers. He put a tennis ball under his arm and shot himself there as well, aiming in the direction of the restaurant. The purpose of the tennis ball was to inhibit the bleeding of the artery. Then he came to the rear to continue his acting, led everyone to the restaurant, and pretended that he was scared, hiding the wound hole with his arms crossed over. Falling to the ground with the first shot, while everyone's attention was drawn to the second shot, he threw the tennis ball away, which was the same one Ron found and threw at Conan's head. All that was necessary for these steps was a smart detective that could find the problem with the watch's strap and lead everyone to think in the direction of someone cheating death. So he anonymously invited Hatori Heiji, who was famous in Kansai. For Kujirai, the most fatal issue he committed was not the watch being worn on the wrong hand, but it was getting some of his blood on the restaurant's glass when he pointed the gun at his arm in front of it. With this absolute physical evidence, and Hatori as an eyewitness, Conan learned from the phone call Agasa just gave him that Hatori was found by a rescue boat that had arrived. All the evidence was put in front of Kujirai, so all he could do was reluctantly plead guilty. 20 years ago, these 3 accomplices made a promise that when the prosecution period of this case came to an end, and news of where to meet up was published in the newspaper under the name of Furukawa, which was used by Kano Saizo before. With various items, a key, stamp, and signature, the 400 million yen that was stolen were withdrawn. Kujirai was the real planner of the trip, trying to pocket the stolen money for himself, while also trying to prove himself to be more capable than Kano Saizo with a perfect crime. But his plan went wrong at the very first step. The Japanese spelling of Furukawa's name would become Kano Saizo if it was read sideways. The coincidence of the names and the dates, unfortunately, drew all of those people that were involved in events of 20 years ago. Inspector Samazaki's powerful search efforts affected his entire criminal operation, and with the presence of Kano's real daughter, Isekai Nagisa, there's no way for Kani to be Kano Saizo, who died 20 years ago, to have no reaction. Even more exaggerated is Abina Minoru, the boyfriend of Inspector Samazaki's daughter. He had been looking for revenge ever since his girlfriend's death, and 20 years of hatred took time away from him, making him look older than his girlfriend's dad. This time, he put a bomb in his suitcase and wanted to die with the murderer, but was stopped by Conan one step ahead. The horror of Kujirai is his impeccable acting and reckless determination to get his way. The so-called perfect crime was more like a cheap impersonation of someone. Almost everyone except him knew about Furukawa and Kano Saizo's connection before they got on a boat. The first time when he killed, he remembered to widen the strap, but mistook the wrong hand. And the second time he killed, he had left the hard evidence of bloodstains. That cigarette trick he used had a high rate of error. The fire on the cigarette could be gone before it burns the thread, or in theory, a greater possibility of a cigarette falling into gasoline is the cigarette going out instead of it lighting the gasoline up. Even if Conan, along with others, didn't come to the ship, and Abina's bomb somehow didn't kill him, after arriving at the destination, the police would be able to arrest Kujirai as long as they investigate the blood on the glass, the reaction of gunpowder on this passenger's body, and the burns caused by shooting at close range. Therefore, his plan was checkmated by the damned name Furukawa from the very beginning. Let alone wanting to surpass him, Kujirai had been played by Kano till applause. Throughout the entire case, there was a sense of mystery and tension from the moment all the characters and their motives got on the ship. The disagreement between the 2 detectives' conclusions, as well as Hatori falling into the sea. After all, the aura of the protagonist in Detective Conan at that time was not yet particularly strong. Unlike nowadays, popular characters will have a 0 death rate, an overall preference for a dark, depressing tone, and it's not a shock which victim dies nowadays. Various explosives and gunshot wounds created a sense of crisis, and in the later stage of the evidence-searching process, an extremely romantic scene was arranged in order to prevent the viewers from being bored. Under this basis, the last twists and turns of the mystery to reveal the foreshadowing of the pseudonym are simply too badass not to mention. This is what we like about Detective Conan, a detective film that combines mystery, horror, deduction, romance, and a little bit of comedy, not an idol drama that's labeled as a romance comedy.